What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Master Crafted, bringing another installment of our favorite series. How to deploy. We got obviously Phil here with us today. Phil, how you doing, buddy?
Good, Lane. How are you, man?
Oh, just living the dream. Can't wait to talk about a layout I never play on, which is layout 3, because none of our local events really run hammer and anvil or sweeping engagement deployments, but your TOs might. So we're going to cover it regardless and make sure that the information is out there. So yeah, let's just go ahead, dive right in. We only got 2 different deployments that we can look at for this one, so it's going to be nice and quick. Yeah, should be able to cruise right through it and get you a nice solid layout 3 episode here on Mastercrafted. So when you look at this layout, I guess, what do you think? Like, playing a full long board edge deployment, what's one of the first things that comes to mind?
Yeah, so I see a few things here. One, these firing lanes are pretty terrifying. It cuts off like almost this whole full portion of the board because of the angles we can take. Just like that area is not deployable. I will not be putting something there unless it's lone op and incredibly safe, or I'm deploying later in the round. And I know my opponent doesn't have an anti-whatever threat there to actually go after and threaten me. The other thing that stands out is how close these objectives are to our deployment zone, and they are evenly close all the way across.
Yeah, it is 12 inches out to touch any of the actual objective markers. About 9 inches is all it takes out of your deployment zone to go stand on one of those objectives. It is excessively open. And you talked, yes, about the edges being wide open, which they definitely are. The other thing is there's a ton of cross shooting lanes that are just like, it's so hard to hide anything on here as this deployment stands, I feel like.
Yeah, if we look at just like a general sketch out of like all the spaces that are blocked, right? Like all of those areas, not counting the areas I've already blocked off on the edges, are like, if we aren't first, we cannot be there, because if we are there, we will get shot.
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the hardest parts, and I think this is one of the reasons why very few TOs actually include this layout or a lot of these missions, is just because it is so very difficult to feel confident in hiding somewhere. That, like, I don't know, looking at this, I'm like, I might keep 2 or 3 big units off the board. My 500 point cap is probably going to be getting maxed out as I just leave things off the board, because as long as I'm taking some space, I'm going to be able to come in off a board edge and likely still be within reasonable range of something on an objective.
Yeah. Yeah, like you can get after both of these side objectives with a strat reserve unit in a reasonable way, which is not the case a lot of the times in other layouts, right? So super, super tough there. But we have to give you some tools, because there are some here that you as a player need to be able to identify that you could take advantage of in a game if this is one of the layouts that you choose. So for me, right off the bat, right, like this area is probably one of the safest, as well as this one, for your tanks, transports, whatever the case is that you really, really want to keep safe. Behind those 2 platforms is the number 1 area where you are going to stage on this deployment. Understandably so. But besides those 2 areas, we're kind of packing 2 large pieces of terrain with as many units as we can fit. Do you see any other locations where you probably want to deploy?
So it is risky, but you can potentially sneak behind the little 2-inch ruin that is on the left side of that top deployment zone and put some stuff there. You might even be able to get out and around it. The big thing is, you're going to be trying to just play this game of chicken with your opponent, saying, hey, we're both going to hide as best we can. None of us are going to plan to deploy on the line, because there is still the chance that I will go second. So I don't want to be somewhere that's super exposed. So if they're playing the same game, right, you're trying to take that into account. A lot of the times when you're looking at deployments, it's very simple to be like, okay, well, you can hide here and then you'll probably move there. On this one, it's, well, you're not technically hidden there, but you're going to count on the fact that even though I could put something on the line, I won't. And so it becomes a lot less simple to actually deploy. I know that sounds very convoluted. To kind of give you a demonstration, right? If you were to go just to the left of that same 2-inch ruin, and deploy a tank there, if you're to say, okay, where around that left board edge would they have a line? And by the time you draw that line out, you are going to say, okay, they only move 10 inches. Are they going to be able to get to that line unless they start on the edge of their deployment zone? Probably not, right? So you're kind of you're both having to play chicken. So that's a somewhat safe place to go because you're banking on the fact that if they have any self-preservation at all, they're not going to deploy on the line. So they should not be able to get something into that line of sight. But still, there is the chance that they could, and that's what makes it feel a little rough. You're like, you know, they might deploy super aggressive and they could win the roll off, and then you're just like, well, I literally can't hide half of my army, and it just feels bad. But if they do that and they lose, then well, guess who gets to go slap all those things that are out in the open? You do. So there are some pros and some cons, and this is going to change a lot too, to based on are you a melee army? Are you a shooting army? What is your opponent playing? That's greatly going to affect how much you're just packing into some of these ruins, how conservatively you are staging. Because if you don't have any, if you are playing on this layout and you do not take some shooting threats, you are going to be in a rough spot if your opponent realizes that and deploys accordingly, where they know they can get lines on a lot of those places that are only kind of safe because you have nothing that can shoot them turn one, and you probably aren't fast enough to touch them turn one either.
Yeah, 100%. If we look at some areas where you want to infiltrate, right? Like, I actually like that little pocket right there. It is a little bit dangerous, right? Because we do have a line here. But if I have, let's say, infiltrate lone op stealth for a lictor or something similar, I do like being in that pocket. There is a world where maybe you're infiltrating a little bit safer behind this wall, maybe behind this one, this 2-inch wall, off the 2-inch wall. That is a reasonable spot, as well as in these pockets here or here, respectively. Red, if you are on the deployment zone of red, that's where you would want to go. If you're on the green deployment zone, you probably want to go there because it's relatively safe. Relatively, I say that because if you look, all it takes is for one line here to come down and get shots into whatever you've put there. I mean, your lone op or infiltrating unit isn't necessarily made to last for the majority of us, so it's something that you're going to have to deal with. For me, if I was to recommend a tactical play for this, I would try to, it's called flipping the board. So right now, if we just talk about attacking, 1, 2, 3, you're just like, I'm just going to go up the board and try to run my units into my opponent's units and hope that at the end of the game, my units are alive and their units are dead. Depending on your army, some armies are capable of doing that. Some armies are not. I would try to flip the board by swinging this way. I don't want to go the other way. I don't want to go this way down onto that. But I really like the terrain that we have here to have multiple line of sight blocking and then use this to try to get on my opponent's home. So that way I would control my home, this natural, and theirs, right? Or pressure theirs to try to knock them off it. And I would try to flip the board. So now we are going downhill, right? Versus trying to go across the board. That would be my one piece of recommendation, but that's army dependent and opponent dependent.
Yeah, I feel like whether it is that way or you decide that maybe the other way is more favorable for your army, you can. I agree with Phil though. The real piece you're leveraging isn't those two side ruins. It's the 5x10s connected to the 2x4s or the 4x6s. I mean, that are there in the middle, because you're able to flip that board, as Phil was saying. That's going to provide you so much extra cover and such a great safe staging ruin to either, go protect your home, even if they're doing the same thing, or go and, pressure their home, just because it's such a nice, flexible, aggressive middle terrain piece.
Absolutely. But there's some things that you would have to do that. You would need to remove the assets that are down here that your opponent put down there, whether they're anti-tank assets or whatever the case is. You have to either push them or kill them so they cannot threaten this objective. If you allow them to live and to kind of like hang around and then also pressure that objective, that strategy will not work overall on this layout.
Yeah. Yep. And the other thing I would find fairly useful is really pay attention, let the game progress, play this very slowly. Anything you put on an objective will die, especially on hammer and anvil on this layout. Um, don't rush out there. Like literally I would just be playing to deny early until the board is maybe a little more developed. See where their big guns are at, because then once we'll say they commit one of their tanks in between their home and the 2-inch ruin to the right. If they commit a piece there, you go, okay, well, I now know that I can either completely stay out of that shooting lane, and I'm going to just really swing hard to the right and try to hit a gap there where I know they can't move to. Or you're going to swing to the left, and you're going to look at where all of these things are, and you're going to say, all right, if I'm going to go push out this turn, where can I push that one of their tanks, at least one of their big assets, is not going to be able to draw a line of sight onto any of the things I'm pushing with? And that can kind of help determine where you're going to go, because it's very dangerous to just yeet your army out there. But if you can restrict how effective some of their assets, especially shooting assets, are on a board that is this wide, because of that width, it makes it a lot harder for those tanks to effectively control multiple shooting lanes. So making them commit to one and then going to the ones they can't cover any longer is one of the ways you can kind of pressure the board.
Absolutely. All right, Lane, you ready to go on to the next one?
Yeah, I feel like it's going to be same, but just a little different. It's going to be just a little bit easier to hit them with the flip the board, because you're already going to have a much easier time safely staging on, the home objective side of your board, and then pushing up to claim what is actually your natural on this board. Anybody who tells you that on the right side of the board, if you're green, is your natural is very wrong. On this, it is just not, you're never going to hold that. In no world are you ever going to hold that against an opponent.
Yeah, totally agree. It's not that this is a bad objective, right? Like, it's fine. You have the capabilities to flip it, but this is going to be your short edge deployment zone. That edge is going to be your opponent's long deployment zone. They have a great staging area here that they can just push out and either put OC on this objective or charge and get into combat with whatever's behind there. The only way that you could probably hold that is if you're facing like a pure shooting army that has awful OC. And I don't know many that exist like that, because even guard, right, with not a lot of combat, they will happily throw 10 guardsmen on that objective, and you will never ever be able to hold it because it's going to be 20 OC, and it's going to be incredibly tough for you to deal with.
Yes, for sure. And then, one of the great points, we talked about it in, Phil brought it up, I believe in the staging video it was, your triangle of power. If you're looking at the objectives, right, that's what makes this so easy to determine where the triangle of power actually is. Trying to hold those three that Phil just marked is going to be so much easier than trying to have resources that can cover the super long distance between your home and that far right objective, as well as the middle, versus just grouping up, getting behind that center ruin, like we talked about, establish the dominance, flip the board, and then start pushing back towards your opponent, and just making sure you have some of those denial pieces in place to just go run out onto their natural in this instance, and go deny them some primary as you flip the board and keep putting the pressure on that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Both of these, we talk about it, and we keep saying it because it is so important. I would strongly recommend just an idea of flipping the board is super important, right? So you could go here and stage and then control this natural and try to like cut your opponent off, create a lane here with whatever it be. Let's say it's shooting assets, or if you have a really great combat unit in here and you're just waiting for something to get inside this pocket that you can go after and fight with. Great, that's how you control this side of the board, and we can do all of those things over and over again, but we need to lock it down, and we need to find a way to make sure that our opponent can't cross this line without being punished for it, right? So, maybe it's a super fast, aggressive shooting unit that comes down this angle to actually punish things on our opponent's home, as well as punish things that are in that piece of terrain, because if they're on that piece of terrain, we have true line of sight, so we can see them. As long as we can actually see them, the base of the terrain isn't protecting them anymore. And that allows us to flip the board and really harp on this triangle of power again that we keep seeing come up over and over again. That is super important, right? We can't put assets here. If we start assets here and wait for our opponent, as Lane recommended, like, let your opponent be patient. Let your opponent come out there. Okay, they went out there. Now we come onto this objective. Now we deny primaries. Now we are, looking for a points advantage, and that's how we get that points advantage overall. We don't need to be aggressive on this objective. We're looking to be reactive there, but aggressive in controlling our own triangle, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, spot on. That's exactly what you're trying to do. You're not trying to be the first one out onto that objective on the right. That's not what you want to do at all, because you're just going to lose it. If you didn't get a denial out of whatever piece you threw out onto that objective, it shouldn't have been there. That is 100% what you are trying to do on that side of the board. And then one of the other things we need to talk about is, depending on what the terrain layout your tournament is running, what kind of terrain you're working with, those walls might be too thick to stand on your home objective and not be seen. It is wide open. So think about taking a lone op just to stand in your own deployment zone the entire game to hold your home objective, because it might be necessary.
Absolutely. Like, if you don't, I would, as your opponent, be looking to take advantage of this lane here, right? I would be looking to push things down here. That way I can pressure my opponent and remove assets off their home, which, denies you points and scores me points. So we like that.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, not a ton to discuss here with layout 3. It's pretty cut and dry. Flip the board, stage in the middle, and then start pressuring. That is about as clean and cut as it can possibly be.
Yeah, I guess the final note for that is just because we say it's not something that TOs use, you should have no apprehension about running it or wanting to do it, or even having it if you're a TO and wanting it on your layout. You just have to be cognizant of what that means for the armies that are going to do well. Cody and Colin talked about it, how much they loved layout 8 and how they made decisions based off that, and how certain armies do well on those layouts and certain armies don't. You just got to be cognizant as a TO, what you're inviting in when you have those types of layouts, because each one of those is going to make a difference. The second is, Lane said at the beginning, like, you need to have shooting assets in some of these. It's not a guarantee. You just have to have a plan. If you have a full combat World Leaders army, it is very doable, right? We saw the staging areas there that we can go after, but you need to have a plan of how you're going to get on those objectives, how you're going to flip objectives, how you're going to apply pressure. And each one of those are going to make a difference for your overall success rate.
Yeah. Yep. As long as you have a plan, you got a chance. Do your homework. When you see this layout, if it pops up, decide what you actually need to take, and go have fun, and hopefully get some wins. Brought to you by Mastercrafted, as always. Phil, any final thoughts before we take off here?
No, absolutely not. I'm excited to do the next one. Layout 4 is going to be a good one.
Yeah. Going back to some of the bread and butter detachments for our region, at least. Dive all into that and talk about some of the more exciting. No, I won't say that. Yes, I will. The more exciting layouts. It's fun. It's better. They're the corner deployments. We love them. But we're going to talk all about that. In the meantime, thank you everybody for liking and subscribing, and we just love having you part of the community. Don't forget to join our Discord. And do not forget that victory isn't given. It's forged, and it's forged right here on Mastercrafted. We'll see y'all next time.